Hello, and welcome to the LGBTQ plus representation in TV panel at South by Southwest. I'm Kevin Fallon, a senior entertainment reporter for the Daily Beast, and joining me today are the creators of HBO Max's dramedy Generation and limited series It's a Sin, both of which are now currently available for streaming on HBO Max. From Generation, we have co-creators, executive producers, and writers Zelda Barnz and her father, Daniel Barnz, who is also a director. And from It's a Sin, we have creator, executive producer, writer, and showrunner Russell T Davies.
Hello.
Or should I say la?
La.
La.
It does when we do.
Of course, that's the really amazing and heartwarming greeting that everyone on It's a Sin does. But I'm very curious. Have you watched each other's shows?
Watched, loved, geeked out, fully fanned over. I think separately, Russell has been kind of a hero, particularly of mine, for years. His shows are so amazing and have so moved and touched me. And it's just no surprise that It's a Sin does the same. It was filled with such extraordinary joy and heartbreak, and something that touched me very deeply as somebody who grew up in that same era. I saw characters and stories that were so resonant and really touched me to the core.
Well, that's amazing. And I'd love to say the same about Generation, but I've got some notes. I'm joking. It's like, imagine if I give you notes now.
You and everybody else.
I love it. I just actually sent you an email saying, it honestly fills me with hope when you see young characters like this being portrayed with so much. I mean, they've got their problems and they've got their angst, but it's so open and clear and positive and hopeful. And you just think, oh, there's a better world ahead when young people can talk to each other like this, when their sexuality is so open and fluid and no one's getting beaten up for anything. It's just absolutely lovely. It really, really, really gives me hope for the future. And not many television shows do that. So gorgeous, really.
Thank you. Gen Z, come save us.
Exactly.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, these are both shows that you just said bring hope into the world, but also I think bring a lot of awareness to a community that's not often portrayed on screen. And I'm curious, what it means to the three of you to be able to tell these stories at this moment in time. And have them out in the world when I think people really need to be responding to them.
I think we definitely live in a very heteronormative world, and that is frequently reflected in media, just generally speaking. And I think that it's so incredibly important right now to be able to tell these stories, and it's such an honor to be able to do so and to be able to represent these people who I see in my friends, I see these characters in myself, and they all just mean so much to me. So yeah, to be able to show that on screen and to tell their stories really means a lot.
It's true. I was just thinking the same, that it's funny because we've just transmitted It's a Sin over here in Britain, and I'm old and weary and cynical, and I'm long in the tooth. And, I did Queer as Folk. I invented that back in 1999. So I've been in this playground for quite a while. And this has been a genuinely radical shift, this program. I always kind of presume there's a gay audience for this, or queer audience, and you'll reach the queer audience. And the crossover this time has been absolutely extraordinary. We've been who expected a drama at AIDS to be a rating success? And it has been. We're all astonished. And I've been stopped in the street by women in their 60s and 70s, men in their 60s and 70s. And I mean straight men and women. It's been a radical crossover for the first time in my memory, having done a lot of these shows. It's been an audience across the board. So that's got to be hopeful. You've got to think that's a better world ahead of us when that's happening. And I'm quite aware that we're all ready to take a step backwards. I never celebrate queer rights and stuff because I always think we have to keep fighting for them. But this one, so I think we can allow a bit of a celebration because I'm delighted, actually. Yeah.
I also think that's a real tribute to you, Russell, and just the way that you construct your characters and stories, because there's such a glorious humanity to them. So you feel when you're watching them, and this is something that Zelda pointed out to me, which I thought was really such a wise way of looking at a lot of TV shows, but you sometimes really feel when you're looking at queer characters that their queer identity defines who they are, and they're not always much beyond their queerness. And I think what you do so beautifully in our show, and it's something that we aspire to do and think a lot about trying to do as successfully, is to construct characters queer characters who walk through the world as queer people and as people, and to see their stories sort of reflecting the whole breadth of who they are as people. In Generation, we have, we have a trans character that's they never talk about their transness. They just are. And it was very refreshing to be able to put a character like that on TV and not feel like their storyline had to be devoted to their experience of being trans, while at the same time honoring the fact that they are trans.
Yeah. Brilliant. And it's like, because Zelda, were you thinking, was television and film driving you mad? Were you thinking, I'm not seen, I can't be, my age isn't represented here, my tribe isn't represented?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, I think I definitely felt a lack of queer representation and accurate queer young representation in the shows I was watching and just on screen and in media in general. I do think there are a lot of shows that do a great job, but specifically for Generation, we were trying to just create the most authentic possible queer representation we could, for sure.
Brilliant, you've done it. It's funny to think, because my show's set in the 1980s and yours set now, my characters would grow up to be the parents in yours. In a way, it's fun, isn't it? And they would be as old and as settled in their ways now as your characters are. That's brilliant.
We were talking about It's a Sin in Generation, and then we got a little lost in the math, and we're like, wait, is it really 40 years apart? And then we were like, yes, it really is 40 years apart. I kind of hated that personally.
I know when we start to make It's a Sin, you put the budget together and there's that bit on the budget that says period drama, tick. And I was like, period drama? Really? 1981 is a period? My life is a period drama now? I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But, if you must.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting to me is we have, creators here, for one show that is, telling the story about Generation, and the creator is pretty much close to the same age as the generation that they're, telling. And then we have with It's a Sin, Russell, you're talking about people who were living, 40 years ago and recharacterizing that time. And I'm curious if you've, thought about the difference that makes, telling a story in real time about people that you are the same age of versus, telling a period piece in retrospect.
It's hard, isn't it? I suppose I had to dig deep. I just had to sit here and remember. I did a lot of research into the 90s. I was the age of the characters. I was 18 in 1981. And so I kind of thought that would be easy. And then you start writing and thinking, I can't remember what I thought last week, let alone 20, 40 years ago. And really trying to remember how you thought in 1981 and then in 1985. Well, it's just a great big blur, isn't it? So I kind of envy Zelda in one sense, in that you're tapping into the here and now. But again, I bet it wasn't that easy, was it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it was interesting being able to draw from such recent memory for things to influence stories. That was definitely very helpful. It was helpful to be able to think about things that had happened to me a year ago or 2 years ago. But at the same time, I really don't have any distance from it. So it's sometimes a bit hard to get perspective because it's a world that I've been so immersed in so recently. So yeah, at times it can be challenging to kind of step back. And at times it's really helpful to be able to have those memories from just a couple years ago. Yeah.
I will say it was an extraordinary gift for us and our whole writer's room, just to have Zelda sitting in there and being a constant kind of barometer and North Star, and she was very careful to make sure that it didn't, to make sure that it didn't feel like the show was feeling filtered through the eyes of adults or through the nostalgia that adults might feel. And she's great. And like all these things that we wouldn't have even thought about. I mean, just the writing of texts and in our show, and we put a capital letter in, and then she, give us a monologue about what it meant when you put a capital letter in a text. And if you put a period at the end of it, it's actually like an indication of aggression. So there can be no period in this text. And so for us, it was just to have this person who's living in it right now, being able to monitor how we were telling these stories and representing these characters and saying, oh, and by the way, if they wear that, they will be fully judged. It was just like, great.
I love the way you did the text because
Yeah,
now so many. Oh, sorry, Zelda. Go on.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, we do engage with social media a lot in our show. We have a lot of social media references, and I think it's helpful to have somebody who knows what all that looks like and how people actually interact using social media and digital platforms. Yeah.
It's what you do. You see so many dramas now where you do see dramas where all the text is written in capital letters. And you go, no one does that. The middle-aged man typed that out. It's like in the design department. And what I love about it, what I think you do brilliant is that a lot of dramas now have kind of whizzy effects with text. They have them flying around the screen or following the characters around. And you just keep it on the screen and you keep it focused and you keep it small because that's what a text is like. It's not flying around like a special effect. It's really focused and you're walking and you're typing really hard. And I loved it for that. It felt like the experience of texting. I thought it was brilliant.
That's amazing. Thank you. And also, as you can, as you know, it was a big technical challenge to be able to pull it off, and continues to be because it's hard to shoot in that way, and it can get really tedious and making sure you get a focus on the screen and stuff like that. But we did really want to, Zelda's whole thing throughout was to make the show feel immersive and authentic, and that was one way that we wanted to really, we wanted to really address it. And her take on social media was also really instructive because she often feels that there are these sort of hidden messages about social media in dramas about high schoolers that are sort of negative, or here's the way that social media is sort of, deteriorating our brains, or, not allowing us to focus. And she was saying, look, it's like a language. And sometimes that language, creates things that are negative, but also it's a way of communicating. And sometimes there are aspects of it that are really positive, particularly for characters who are queer, because within the world of social media, queer teenagers can find community. And so she really wanted to make sure that the show was walking that fine line of saying, yeah, sometimes social media can suck and distract you, and sometimes it's amazing and it's community building and can save you.
I was curious to hear more about that. I'm curious if there, in what ways did all three of you feel like you were having to maybe correct to the conversations that have been had, or the way that generations have been depicted in your shows, whether it's how the AIDS epidemic was portrayed in media over time, or now the way that Generation Z is talked about in culture, and the ways that you want to sort of correct those conversations.
Interesting, I suppose. So I kicked that off. I thought correct is an interesting word. It's like, because I was very much aware with writing about AIDS and HIV that I was entering a body of work. There's lots of many great pieces of work around that subject, particularly American. Actually, it wasn't a correction, but it was a balance. Was to present it from the British point of view, which hasn't been unportrayed, but has never been centre stage quite like this before. And it's not so much correcting as there were things I was able to. If there's a play or a film or a novel involving HIV and AIDS, I've probably watched it. As a gay man of this age, I'm just drawn to that. So I felt more like I was adding to it. Those are brilliant pieces. I'd hate to say I was correcting anyone, but for example, it's like in 1983, 1984, there was that great kind of, I felt that great kind of AIDS denial, where you just felt like it couldn't possibly be true that a virus could affect only gay people, that it affected gay men, that there was a gay plague, that there was a gay cancer. And you and I all now know that that's a very headliney way of dealing with a virus that can affect anyone. But nonetheless, through the prism of gay men in the 80s, that it was seen as that. And I was a student then, and I was literally going, that's nonsense, that can't be true. And literally, I don't want to say like a COVID denier because they're mad, but at the time an AIDS denier wasn't so mad because it sounds so impossible to be told there's a gay cancer, a gay plague. So I'd never seen that put into a drama. I mean, maybe I'm sure there's plenty of dramas I haven't seen, but I wanted to put that in especially, and also I wanted a bit more forgiveness in there. There's a lot of anger in writing about AIDS, which is completely understandable. I mean, you look at The Normal Heart. I mean, that is piping white hot fury. I adore that piece of work. It's just seminal. It's amazing. But that is so furious. That kind of allowed me to be not so furious. I say, right, the anger's there. Brilliant. Larry Graham has done that. I can just pull back a little bit and be a bit more more of a hard stare as opposed to a furious stare. So I found myself correcting in those terms. But I think there's a big correction. Here we are talking about LGBT stuff. The big correction was simply to remind the straight audience that this happened and to tell a younger audience who have got no idea that this happened, which I was a bit cynical about that aim before we transmitted, thinking, surely people know about this. And the response has been astonishing. As we suspected, like 18-year-olds with no idea that this ever happened. And indeed, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who, if you were straight, you were able to look away and not acknowledge it. And the response from them has been phenomenal. So I feel very lucky in that sense.
That's what I really loved about it, too, is I just felt like there was this sort of immersive feeling of it unfolding in real time. And the sort of the confusion that existed, and the way of sort of, walking through life in a way that was sort of very hedonistic and free, but also being kind of like encountered by the realities of it. And I thought, for me, what was just really powerful was to see that coexistence of joy and pain in the storytelling, which oftentimes you don't quite see that balance, because there is an extraordinary amount of pain or anger. And I thought your show just walks a really brilliant line.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, Z. How do you feel the challenges and the stresses of representing people your age?
It's interesting. The thing is, I haven't heard very many generalizations and stereotypes about Gen Z, because the youngest members of Gen Z are 9 or 10 years old. So there hasn't been a lot of, I think the way millennials often get slammed, there hasn't been a lot of that for Gen Z yet, just because some of us are still so young. But definitely it's interesting. I do see a lot of saying that we're like the digital generation, it's true, but also people say it in such a negative way, and I don't think it has to be a negative thing. So representing that accurately has definitely been a challenge, because people get so up in arms about things like social media and iPhones. And it's just so interesting. I don't think it's necessarily negative. It has the ability to connect young queer youth with other queer people and other queer communities, which has been really amazing. I just think there are a lot of really good things about growing up in an age with such advanced technology, and obviously some downfalls as well. But we're trying to portray it just as truthfully as possible.
Right now in 2021, the flavor of drama and fiction, quite rightly, is about authenticity and representation and truth. I mean, have you felt a pressure to represent everyone in a drama set today? It's because that's a real pressure. There will be people queuing up saying, I can't see myself, despite your wonderful representation. Yeah.
Right, of course. Yeah, I definitely think that queer representation was our focus when we started working on this project. So what's most important to me is specifically LGBTQ plus representation. But yes, definitely there is kind of pressure to have important straight characters in the show, which is interesting because I don't feel like there's often pressure to have important LGBT characters in your show. So I don't know. It's definitely an odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's, you raise a great point, Russell, because it was something that, we have been thinking a lot about, is sort of like, how do you have, you want to explore so many characters who identify in different ways across the sexuality and gender spectrum. And you also want to explore, characters of color in different ways. And so I think it was one thing that I have to say that Zelda was really incredible about was when we started writing our very first script, she would make sure that every character was always specified in terms of, whether they were Latinx or Black or Asian, because we wanted to make sure that the people who were reading the scripts understood that these were intended to be characters of color, because executives tend to read scripts with characters, assuming that they're white. And when we began casting, she was really incredible about making sure that we were always staying true to that. And that sometimes, you're trying to find an actor to fit so many different categories, and she, and she would make sure that we were never straying from the path of making sure that, the characters were also as diverse as the people that she's, living in the world with.
Brilliant. I absolutely agree. I think when you, a lot of people don't specify, they say it's colorblind casting, and that very often means white casting in the end, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I am absolutely agree. Brilliant. Well done.
I'm curious because for me as someone who has to watch a lot of TV for work, it's still very rare and a pleasure to feel represented in a queer storyline on screen. But I'm curious for the three of you, because you got to create these storylines, create these characters, if there is anybody in your shows that you sort of connected with the most and had a sort of heart bond with.
Well, I will say for me that I feel myself in all of the characters in different ways. I think that's what it is to be a writer, is that you kind of pour a little bit of yourself into everybody in a different way. But I will say for a lot of these characters, there's somebody that I wish I had been. And there is a moment, where one of our characters, turns to character of Chester, who's played by Justin Smith. And he says, you are the person that I wish I had been when I was in high school. And that honestly was sort of, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of them, that, that I wish that I had that courage and that openness and that permission, to feel confused and conflicted about things that I find so inspiring about Zelda and so many of her friends. I felt like I was very tortured as a teenager. And I think that there's just this incredible way that, so many of Zelda and her friends walk through the world. That's really inspiring. So for me, I will say there's a lot of wish fulfillment going on. I wish I could be those people.
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. I feel like I've definitely written a little piece of myself into every character. So I definitely connect with a lot of them. It's hard to pick one who I feel like I relate the most to. Yeah, they all just mean a lot to me. Yeah.
I identify with the mum in Generation. I'm the Christian mum. Disapproving of all the children. You can see brilliant. Is it Megan? What's her name? Megan? I love her.
Megan.
I love her. That's me. I'm glad to be that kind of. But it's the same with It's a Sin. It's like, I wrote them all. We don't have a writer's room. It's often different in Britain. It's just me writing them all. So I'm all of them, really. It's like, people are often very kind and say, "Oh, you're that nice, lovely gay character." And I'm like, "No, I'm the horrible bastard one, really." It's like I'm the one. But all of them, I hope, little bits of them. And you know this, Zelda, and you're also drawing off everyone you've ever met. In many ways, you're the only experience you've got, but you listen all the time, every day, to everyone you ever meet. And you find yourself putting them in there. Never be friends with a writer. You'll just be used and abused and chopped up and put on screen.
I will say that just to your initial question, part of the genesis of this project came out of these conversations that we were having in our house and amongst our family, because Zelda wasn't really feeling like she was seeing herself and the people that she knew in many of these, shows that were portraying teenagers. And so that it actually was the genesis of how could I show a piece of myself and the people that I'm seeing around me on TV.
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to talk a little bit about sex. Sorry for the father and daughter who, but it's obviously still, when it comes to queer storytelling, we're still breaking boundaries and making progress in terms of how sex among queer people is portrayed on screen. And I'm curious what the three of you thought about in terms of how sex would be, shown and used in your shows, and in terms of, how it's still a very new thing for people to be watching on their TVs.
Honestly, I think a lot of shows with queer characters tend to, I think sometimes in media, representation of queer characters can be very unsexual, I guess. Like, they tend to strip queer characters of their actual sexuality just because they want to make it more digestible for straight people in a lot of cases, I think. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case with our show. We wanted to make sure that our characters felt like normal teenagers who were having sex as much as straight teenagers were in some cases, and in some cases having as little sex as straight teenagers sometimes are. So it's honestly, there's not much difference between the way straight teenagers go about coming of age and sex and sexuality and the way that queer teenagers do. Yeah, honestly, we just tried to make it feel as accurate and as real as possible.
And I think that was the other thing too, is that we wanted to make sure that the sex in our show felt like it's the way that you experience sex when you're a teenager, which is oftentimes like not that smooth or too fast or unfolding in a room that's like too bright, that's not glossy. And I think that, sometimes it can feel like when you're watching, very sexy shows about teenagers that, the way that they're having these sexual interactions are just so polished. And I think we wanted to tap into something that felt a little bit more messy and kind of raw and authentic and sometimes really funny. And so we're always trying to kind of lean into that aspect of it.
I love it. I've got to say, what is in that boy's spunk that causes pink eye? My favourite bit. But I have to say, I'm feeling very old now because I've been writing filth for like 25 years now. And it's like you go back to Queer as Folk, and I mean the British Queer as Folk, that's as explicit as it gets. Yeah. I've never seen anything as explicit since. But it's interesting, actually. That kind of touches on an interesting thing that I think very much touches on gay culture and gay drama, is that, and actually the whole of gay rights, actually, which is that our revolutions have to keep on happening. We have to keep on doing it. Literally, I did 22 years ago since I did those sex scenes in Queer as Folk, and there was a fuss, and then everyone went, oh, it's the end of the world, and then it died down, and then the next chance to do gay sex scene, there was a fuss, and everyone made a fuss. It's like you have to keep, and you must have seen this like with our soap operas. It's like two men kiss, oh my God, it's the end of the world, say the newspapers, and then 5 years pass, another gay couple, and in fairness, I will say it gets less and less and less over those years, but it does prove that you need to keep on doing it, and you need to, it's a war of attrition in the end, and it's the same with gay rights. I always think, at the moment here in Great Britain, we've got a Home Secretary. I don't know if you have a Home Secretary in America. The Home Secretary is in charge of the laws of the land under this Tory government, and she voted against gay marriage, and she's in charge of the laws of the land now. It doesn't actually threaten the law, but it's a step backwards. It's a very big step backwards, and she's a monster. So you have to keep on fighting, and in 10 years' time, someone will be on a Zoom panel like this talking about the great gay, sexual, queer liberation of the sex scene they've done. The same conversation. It'll be the same. The world is so straight. We have to keep on doing this time and time again. But as long as we do, then that's fine. As long as the next generation like Zelda comes along and finds new ways to do it, then everything's working. But isn't it a shame that we have to keep on doing it?
Yes. As long as straight is the default. As long as straight is the default, queer representation will always be so incredibly important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I also think it's interesting too, because I think what Zelda is pushing us to do also with the show is that allow there to be sexual feelings or interactions that don't necessarily define identity, so that you can have characters, as teenagers do, exploring, right? So that you can have a girl who's drawn to another girl, but doesn't define herself, as a lesbian, not because she's in denial, but because I think that many people in Gen Z exist in a much more fluid and open relationship to how they think about their sexuality. And so in the past, it always just felt like whenever you saw a sex act between two same-sex people on screen, it was like, okay, that person's this. And I think that hopefully we can start entering a new era when it's sort of like, I don't know, like teenagers are just confused and weirded out, trying to figure it all out and like doing stuff and hooking up and regretting it and loving it.
Can I ask, technically, you're allowed to show that photo of an erection on screen? Well, that wouldn't be allowed in Britain. Are there any laws or rules about that? That's forbidden here.
Not that we've been told about yet.
Hooray! That would be interesting. That would be interesting if they go to show Generation in the UK. Which I hope they will. I'm sure they will. Are you going to be shown over here? Probably. You'll probably be on Sky, I think. Mm.
Yeah.
Zelda, what was that amazing statistic that you said about Gen Z and identifying as not straight?
Oh, so there have been a lot of statistics surrounding Gen Z's general sexual identity, how many of us are queer. It's somewhere between 30 and 50% of Gen Z currently identifies as queer. But like I said, many of us are very young. Many of us are 9 or 10 years old. I'm assuming most 9 or 10-year-olds don't know their sexuality. I didn't know mine when I was 9. So yeah, it's difficult to get a proper statistic, but it's looking like a pretty large percentage, which is pretty impressive. Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. And one of the great things about both of these shows is that for so long, I feel like queer storytelling was synonymous with trauma. And these two series, certainly acknowledge and validate, the harder aspects of queer life. But there's so much joy in them, and happiness and love. And I'm curious, what you thought about when making these shows in terms of being sure to show the joy of being a queer gay person, and what that would mean to people who are watching.
Personally, I know I don't like seeing queer youth and queer people in general bullied and brutalized on screen. I don't feel like it feels like trauma porn a little bit to me, and that's not something that I'm interested in watching. So I personally definitely wanted this show to be about joy and to be about love and all the great parts of identifying as LGBTQ+. And I mean, my high school experience, there were plenty of queer couples who were out and open and didn't really get a lot of attention. Nobody really cared. There's definitely less of a stigma surrounding queer youth. Yeah, definitely.
And Russell, that must have been an interesting balance for you to strike too, because obviously when you're talking about, AIDS, it's trauma is inherent, but you really do capture, again, the joy of these people. So what was that like on your end?
That was the battle, because I so agree with everything Zelda's saying, and that's a joy. And my God, that's brilliant. That's the future. And but of course, I'm back in 1981, and also it's a drama about AIDS. It's tough. It's got that shadow hanging over it from the start. But that was the point. I wanted to write the joy in, because I think we tend to remember the deaths of those people, and those deaths were surrounded by shame and stigma and fear and ignorance and ever since, those of us in the queer world will try to remember those people, but we remember them at vigils and fundraisers and fundraising and memorials, which carries a certain shadow with it. It's like the memory is always in a shadow. And so I wanted to kind of bring that out of the shadow. The death is the full stop, but the life is the sentence leading up to that full stop. So I wanted to bring back the joy. And the lovely thing about the transmission of this show has been people talking and anecdotes online and responses to us and the production company and to the channel and in the newspapers, which is people talking about people who died with so much joy and life, remembering all the funny things they did, not, just those Sunday mornings with your best friend who got a hangover and the meals you went to and the funny, the great punchlines they came out with and the in-jokes that you had and the brilliant lives that they led, ordinary lives, just completely ordinary lives, but when you're with your friends and it's a Friday night and you've got a pizza, you never laugh more. So that's what people are reacting to, and they are telling stories like that. A lot of them saying, I haven't told these stories for years. People I've known all my life are piping up saying, oh, I had a friend who died of AIDS. I had a friend who died of AIDS. And they've never mentioned them before. It's astonishing. And that's happening to all of us on this team. So that was the point of the drama, really, was to say, actually, this is a tough subject, and the end of their lives is going to be tough in this drama, but come and enjoy their lives. Come and have fun. Actually, it's a funny show. It's colourful. It's sexy. It's fun. It's got the most beautiful cast shining out of the screen. And that was the point, actually, was to say, come and celebrate these people. Don't just put your widow's weeds on and mourn for them. So, yeah.
It's unfortunate that we're running out of time, but before we head out, I wanted to ask the three of you, is there something that you learned about the other's generation from watching each other's shows?
Well, I've learned, honestly, from watching Generation, I've learned hope. Genuine, I said that before, but it's like, what? And that statistic you just gave, Zelda, is fantastic, isn't it? And you see it. You see some of those Generation Z people, in the street, just walking around with their mates, and you can see a fluidity and a relaxedness, and the way boys and girls will touch each other is becoming a different thing. I mean, in a completely friendly and safe way. It's joyous to see, and to get that on television is a real achievement, I think, because television, it can be so hard to capture the moment. It's very hard to capture 2021 on screen, and I really think you've done it. So I just leave it with hope for the future. If kids carry on in that way, I'm sorry to call them kids, I'm an old man, but if kids carry on like that, there's got to be a better world, and they will vote for better governments, surely.
I mean, I think the thing that I always learn from Russell's shows, and I think about this show, but I also think about Years and Years and Queer as Folk, is the humanity that I think he brings to all of his kind of, characters and stories. And what's amazing is that even though, this show is, is very LGBTQ plus centered, what I think is extraordinary about so many of the shows is seeing these sorts of narratives and stories that get interwoven. Years and years, I wept uncontrollably and in that thing. And I think it was so incredible to sort of weave those things. And what I think is revolutionary about your work is not just that you're able to bring such humanity to these stories, but you find ways to kind of weave them in and bring them into this very sort of universal sphere that speak to so many people. I mean, you spoke in the beginning about how you're getting reactions to this show from so many different kinds of unexpected people. And I honestly think that's like a tribute to the way that you construct stories. And I think for me, that is a sort of a next era in thinking about these shows. Is sort of like, one of our lead characters, right, is very, he walks through the, school in a crop top. But you also learn within the first couple of moments that he's, a star water polo player and has a 4.1 GPA. And I think what we're looking to do is to find ways of showing characters that, for whom their queerness is a part of them, but is not their solely defining part of them. And I think Zelda and I have only been able to do this, honestly, because of a road that Russell has helped to forge for us in how we can think about characters.
Thank you. We're lucky. We're very lucky to be able to say hello in session. I really love it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. And as a reminder, both HBO Max's Generation and It's a Sin are currently now available for streaming on HBO Max. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.